Imagine trusting someone so much that you treat them like a son. This person has been in your home for 15 years, knows your most intimate secrets, cares for your daughters, and has complete access to your home. Now imagine discovering that this same person is responsible for a parent's worst nightmare. This is the true story of how trust can turn into the biggest mistake. If you're not yet part of our community, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any real-life stories like this one that forever marked the city of Mogi das Cruzes. The early morning of November 12, 2011 should have been just another ordinary morning in the quiet town of Mogi das Cruzes in the interior of São Paulo. But when the sun rose that Saturday, the reality was completely different. Vila Oliveira, a quiet residential neighborhood where middle-class families raised their children in safety, had become the scene of one of the most brutal crimes the region had ever witnessed. Chief Francisco was attending the opening of the Jogos Abertos de Interior when, around 10 o'clock the night before, he received the call that would change his career. On the other end of the line, a voice reported a recent double homicide. 2 young women had been found dead under extremely violent circumstances. The chief, experienced in a variety of crimes, had no idea he was about to encounter a case that would mark him for the rest of his life. A few minutes later, his phone rang again. This time it was Nelson, a respected mechanic in town and owner of a successful repair shop. But the voice coming from the receiver wasn't that of the quiet, hard-working man everyone knew. It was the desperate cry of a father who had just discovered the unthinkable. "Francisco! Francisco! They killed my daughters! They killed my daughters!" Chief Francisco immediately canceled all his evening appointments. He told his wife the outing was off and that he wouldn't be returning home anytime soon. Something in Nelson's voice warned him that he was about to encounter something far more serious than the ordinary crimes he usually investigated. Upon arriving at the address in Vila Oliveira, he found the scene that confirmed his worst premonitions. The military police had already cordoned off the area, and a SAMU ambulance was parked in front of the residence. Nelson sat in the patrol car, completely distraught, crying uncontrollably and repeating over and over, "They killed my daughters! My house looks like a meatpacking plant!" The house where it all happened was an elegant 2-story house, typical of an upper-middle-class family. Nelson and Rita had built there not just a home, but a true family sanctuary. It was a residence that exuded love, care, and unity. The walls were decorated with photos of their 2 daughters at different stages in their lives, from their childhood to the young women they had become. When Chief Francisco entered the house, he encountered a scene that would forever be etched in his memory. Renata and Roberta's bodies were scattered throughout the house in various rooms, bearing signs of extreme violence. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, the floor, and the furniture. The young women's private parts were exposed, indicating they had been sexually assaulted. The scene was one of unprecedented brutality. Renata, the eldest daughter, 22, was considered a model of a promising young woman. She worked at the city courthouse as a judge's assistant and had a dream to become a judge. Everyone who knew her in the legal field made a point of praising her dedication, intelligence, and professional demeanor. She was a slim, elegant young woman who matched her glasses with handbags and shoes, always very well dressed and well groomed. At the courthouse, Renata presided over conciliation hearings between conflicting parties. Despite her young age, she demonstrated impressive maturity in dealing with complex issues. Senior officials often said she was born for law. Her dedication to her studies was exemplary, and everyone was certain she would achieve her dream of becoming a judge. Nelson, her father, was immensely proud of his daughter. Whenever he spoke to acquaintances about Renata, his face would light up. "My daughters are doing very well," he would say. "Renata actually works at the courthouse and has a strong desire to be a judge. She works hard for it." His father made a point of picking up his daughter from work every day, demonstrating the care and protection he had for her. Roberta, the youngest, 18, was equally dedicated to her studies. She was in her final year of high school and intensely preparing for the university entrance exam. She was a studious young woman, spending hours poring over books, always aiming to get into a good university. Like her sister, Roberta was very well-mannered, respectful, and well-liked by all who knew her. The two sisters were inseparable. Despite the age difference, they maintained a very close relationship, sharing dreams, secrets, and plans for the future. They studied together, went out together, and were considered true princesses by family and friends. Rita, the girl's mother, was a woman who lived exclusively for her family. She didn't work outside the home, dedicating all her time and energy to caring for the house and her daughters. She was the one who took the girls shopping, organized family trips, and made sure they were always well-dressed and well-groomed. Neighbors and acquaintances always praised Rita's dedication as a mother. The family was known in the region as an example of unity and harmony. Nelson, a hard-working and honest man, Rita, a dedicated and loving mother, and their two daughters promising and well-educated young women. It was the kind of family everyone admired and that seemed to have everything to be happy. The house where they lived was in a small, gated community with few residences. All the neighbors liked the family, who were always respectful and friendly. It was a safe environment where children played in the street and adults chatted calmly about everyday matters. But on that night of November 11th, all this tranquility was brutally interrupted. The police's subsequent reconstruction of the events revealed a sequence of events that shocked even the most experienced investigators. Renata had arrived from the courthouse late in the afternoon, around 5 p.m. As she always did, she went upstairs to change out of her work clothes. She took off her formal attire and put on more comfortable clothes, shorts and a simple blouse. She went down to the living room, sat on the sofa, and picked up one of her law books, probably studying for a public exam, or simply brushing up on her knowledge of the field. While reading, she also surfed the internet on her computer. It was a common routine for her, studying, researching case law, reading about the law.
No one imagined that those would be the last moments of peace for the young woman who dreamed of becoming a judge. Roberta, meanwhile, was on the second floor of the house, in her bedroom, listening to music with headphones at high volume. She was a typical teenager who enjoyed her private moments, immersed in her favorite songs. The loud volume of her headphones prevented her from hearing any noise coming from downstairs. It was at that moment that the tragedy began. It's unclear exactly how the attacker approached, but something caused him to completely lose control. Perhaps Renata reacted to some inappropriate advance. Perhaps she tried to defend herself. Or perhaps the simple fact of being there, alone and vulnerable, awakened her attacker's most primal instincts. What is known is that at a certain point, the man walked to a small bathroom near the living room. There he found a fish knife, a common utensil in any kitchen, but which in that moment became the weapon of a heinous crime. He grabbed the knife and returned to where Renata was. The attack was brutal and merciless. Renata had no chance to defend herself adequately. The wounds found on her body indicated she tried to resist, but she was quickly overpowered by her attacker's violence. The sofa she was sitting on was soaked in blood, and marks on the floor indicated a struggle. Roberta, still on the second floor, was alerted by the noise. She took off her headphones and went downstairs to see what was happening. What she found was a horrific scene. her older sister being brutally attacked by someone she knew all too well. The young woman tried to escape, but she didn't have time. The attacker, already furious, attacked her as well. Roberta ran toward the front door of the house, trying to escape this nightmare, but was caught before she could get out. A deep blow to the neck sent her reeling. The bloodstains on the floor told the horrific story of Roberta's final moments. She had been severely injured, but she still tried to crawl, fighting for her life. The trail of blood showed that she had made her way from the living room to the kitchen, where she finally succumbed to her injuries. But the brutality didn't stop there. A subsequent forensic examination revealed that both victims had suffered attempted rape. The bodies bore bruises, purple and red marks that indicated sexual violence. On one victim, the marks were purple, indicating they were inflicted while still alive, while on the other, they were red, suggesting the violence continued even after death. The coroner, Dr. Paulo, a seasoned professional with over 30 years of experience, said he had never seen such brutality. The primary cause of death was hemorrhaging, he explained, because the injuries were extremely deep in the neck region, causing damage to major arteries and massive hemorrhaging. According to the medical report, the victims lost consciousness within 2 to 3 minutes due to massive blood loss. There was no chance of emergency assistance, as the injuries were fatal from the outset. These were very severe, very intense injuries with damage even to the trachea, the medical examiner explained. But who was responsible for such barbarity? The answer was closer than anyone could have imagined. When Nelson arrived home from work that night, he found the front door of the house open. There, leaning on the front steps, was a man he knew very well. He was dressed in bloody clothes and still holding the knife he had used in the crime. It was Antonio Carlos, affectionately known to everyone as Tartaruga. Antonio Carlos wasn't a stranger who had broken into the house. Quite the opposite. He had been visiting the residence for 15 years, ever since the girls were little. He started working for the family when he was about 20, and Nelson's daughters were only 3 years old. He literally watched the girls grow up, participated in their development, and was present at important moments in their lives. Known as Tartaruga, turtle, because of his slower, more careful approach, Antonio Carlos was much more than just a servant. He was considered a member of the family. He did everything around the house, tidying the garden, painting walls, fixing outlets, and taking care of the pool. He was a true jack of all trades, always meticulous and dedicated to his work. Nelson treated him as if he were his own son. Antonio Carlos participated in family meals, sat at the table with everyone, and ate the same food. He had complete freedom in the house, knew every room, knew where every object was, had the keys, and could come and go as needed. Rita also treated him with great maternal affection. She prepared food baskets and delivered them to his home in Biritiba Mirim, a neighboring town where he lived. Since Antonio Carlos didn't have a car, Rita made a point of helping him with transportation whenever necessary. She treated him as if he were truly her own son. More than that, Nelson paid for Antonio Carlos's engineering education. He believed in the young man's potential and wanted to give him opportunities to grow in life. It was an investment made with love and trust, in the hope that he could have a better future. Antonio Carlos was described by everyone as an extremely polite and respectful person. He never raised his voice and always asked permission to sit at the table or stand up. He greeted everyone politely, addressing Nelson as Mr. Nelson and Rita as Miss Rita. He was the kind of person who inspired trust and respect. Neighbors and acquaintances always praised Antonio Carlos's behavior. He was a man above suspicion, said one of the family friends. He never displayed any kind of inappropriate behavior. On the contrary, he was always very respectful to the girls and the entire family. Their trust was so strong that Nelson and Rita would leave Antonio Carlos alone with their daughters without a worry. "Take care of the girls, I'm going out and I'll be right back," was a common phrase Rita would say when she had to be away. It never occurred to anyone in the family that this trust could be dangerous. For 15 years, Antonio Carlos had unrestricted access to that house. He knew the routine of each family member, their work, study, and rest times. He knew when Nelson arrived home from the workshop, when Rita went shopping, when the girls were home alone. This intimate knowledge of the family routine would be used in the most cruel way possible. On that fateful night, Rita and Nelson had gone out to take care of business at a real estate agency. Only the maid, the pool attendant, and Antonio Carlos remained at home. According to later reports, the maid left first, then the pool attendant, leaving Antonio Carlos as the last person in the house with the two young women. When Nelson arrived and found Antonio Carlos injured at the entrance of the house, his first reaction was of concern and sympathy.
Antonio Carlos claimed that the thieves had broken into the house, that he had tried to defend the girls but was unable to prevent the tragedy. He presented his own injuries as proof of his story. Nelson, in utter despair, immediately believed the story presented. How could he suspect someone he considered a son? How could he imagine that this trusted man, whom he had helped for 15 years, could be responsible for his daughter's deaths? Antonio Carlos was taken to the hospital for treatment. But something puzzled Chief Francisco. The suspect's injuries were very superficial compared to the brutality suffered by the victims. How could two defenseless young women have managed to injure him so little, considering he was a strong man who had previously fought? Furthermore, nothing had been stolen from the house. Valuables, money, jewelry, everything was in place. If there had truly been a break-in, why was nothing taken? Why would the alleged thieves have wasted time attacking their victims so brutally if their goal was simply to steal? Chief Francisco, with over 30 years of experience in criminal investigations, immediately suspected the story presented. He decided to investigate further, beginning with a detailed analysis of the crime scene. The house was thoroughly investigated. Every room was examined, every blood stain analyzed, every object inspected. The Forensic Institute worked for hours collecting evidence. Photographs were taken from every possible angle, documenting the brutality of the crime. The police chief also made a point of interviewing everyone who had access to the house. He spoke with the maid, who confirmed she had left before the crime. He spoke with the pool attendant, who had also already left the residence. Only Antonio Carlos remained as the last person present in the house besides the victims. When the police chief went to the hospital to question Antonio Carlos, he found him awake and conscious, but his demeanor was completely defensive. He refused to provide details about what happened, didn't cooperate with the investigation, and adamantly maintained the thieves' version of events. The police chief carefully observed Antonio Carlos' injuries. He was covered in blood, but the wounds were quite superficial. For a man who claimed to have fought off multiple attackers to defend two young women, the injuries were inconsistent with his account. "I looked at him and wasn't convinced," the police chief reported. "These were very superficial injuries compared to the ones the girls suffered. He's a strong individual who had previously fought. How could the girls be injured like that, and he only had minor injuries?" The police chief's investigative intuition proved correct. He spoke with the hospital doctor and requested that Antonio Carlos be kept under medical observation until the following day. He argued that this was a high-profile investigation and that he couldn't risk losing the prime suspect. The next morning, Antonio Carlos was transferred to the homicide unit for formal questioning. Chief Francisco, along with other officers, devised a strategy to break the suspect's resistance. During the interrogation, the police chief worked with Antonio Carlos psychologically. He spoke about the trusting relationship he had with his family, how he was treated like a son for 50 years, and the investment Nelson made in his education. "You are very fond of the girls," the police chief said. "You were raised as their son and watched them grow up. If thieves really did break into the house, didn't you do anything to defend them? Didn't you take any action to protect the girls?" Antonio Carlos was visibly apprehensive about these questions. The police chief was touching on sensitive points, questioning the coherence of his story. If he truly loved that family as he claimed, why didn't he give his own life to protect the girls? The decisive moment came when the police chief decided to confront Antonio Carlos with the crime scene photographs. It was a risky strategy, but one that could definitively break the suspect's resistance. "I'm going to get some photos and show them to you, so you can see the gift you're leaving for Nelson." Antonio Carlos was already showing signs of dejection, but he still maintained his version. The police chief brought photographs from the crime scene, shocking images that revealed the brutality suffered by the victims. When he showed them to Antonio Carlos, the effect was immediate. The man who had maintained his innocence for hours completely broke down. He cried a lot, and then I saw he was ready to respond. It was at that moment that the police chief called the judge and the defense attorney to witness what was about to happen. In the presence of the judge and the lawyer, with the photographs still on the table, the police chief asked the crucial question: "Tartaruga, were you the one who killed the girls?" Antonio Carlos, who had been hunched over with his head bowed, slowly raised his face. With a choked voice, in the presence of qualified witnesses, he uttered the words that confirmed what everyone already suspected: "It was me." The confession was a moment of relief for the investigation, but of immeasurable pain for the family. When the police chief returned to Nelson's home to deliver the news, he found the man still in complete denial. "Nelson, I came here to tell you that it was Tartaruga who killed the girls." Nelson's reaction was immediate. No, I'm not convinced. He can't be. 15 years of trust couldn't be destroyed so easily. The police chief had to explain the evidence in detail, highlight the inconsistencies in his initial version, and recount the confession. Only then did Nelson begin to accept the horrific reality that the man he had treated like a son for 15 years had murdered his 2 daughters in the most brutal way possible. The psychological impact on Nelson was devastating. Besides the immeasurable pain of losing his daughters, he now carried the weight of guilt. How had he missed the signs? How could he have trusted so much? How could he have allowed his daughters to be alone with a murderer? Rita, for her part, never recovered. The woman who lived exclusively for her daughters lost her sense of purpose. Her physical features changed completely. Painful expressions took over her face. She began taking tranquilizers and developed chronic insomnia. The couple could no longer live in the house where it all happened. The memories were too strong, every room bringing back the terrifying moments of that night. They sold the property and moved to the northeast, trying to start over, far from the painful memories. But there's no place in the world where you can escape the pain of losing a child. Wherever they go, those images, that moment, will always come back. A family friend observed.
That whole tragedy, that despair, the tragic, cruel, and cowardly way they lost their daughters, they will never forget. The trial of Antonio Carlos was watched by the entire community of Mogi das Cruzes. The case had gained national attention, and everyone wanted to understand how someone so seemingly trustworthy could commit such an atrocity. During the trial, Antonio Carlos's defense tried to claim that he had momentarily lost consciousness, attempting to have him deemed unaccountable and sent to psychiatric treatment instead of prison. But the evidence clearly showed that he was fully aware of his actions. "We found that he displayed the momentary behavior of a true psychopath," the police chief explained, "but not the kind of psychopath who needs treatment. He has moments when he becomes a true beast, a true monster, but he is able to discern the criminal nature of the act. In other words, he knew what he was doing. The psychiatric examination confirmed that Antonio Carlos was mentally capable of answering for his actions. He knew right from wrong, understood the consequences of his actions, and was fully aware of what he was doing at the time of the crime. During the trial, the public prosecutor emphasized the exceptional gravity of the case. This wasn't just a homicide, he argued. It was a crime involving sexual violence, extreme brutality, and a complete breach of trust. The defendant took advantage of a privileged position within the family to commit these heinous crimes. The conviction came after months of legal proceedings. Antonio Carlos was sentenced for first-degree murder and rape. The sentence was exemplary, reflecting the gravity of the crimes committed. But even with the conviction, the family's suffering was not over. Nolson developed health problems related to stress and depression. Rita required constant psychiatric monitoring. Both still bear the scars of a trust that cost their daughters their lives. Forensic pathologist Dr. Paulo Brum, who worked on the case, was also deeply impacted by the experience. "Honestly, I don't know if it would be satisfying," he said of the case's conclusion. "It would just be a sense of duty fulfilled. It's not pleasant dealing with crime. It's not pleasant dealing with problems that involve so much brutality, so many injuries, so much misfortune." The most difficult moment for the coroner was when, during the autopsy, he received a call from his own daughter saying she knew the victims. "At that moment, I thought, it could be my daughter. Talking about other people's cases might be easier, but imagining that this case could be someone you own is very difficult." Chief Francisco, who led the investigation, also reflected on the lessons learned from the case. "The biggest lesson is that we as parents must always be vigilant. No one knows anyone's heart. Even people who seem trustworthy can hide a dark side." The case sparked important discussions about family safety and trust. Many families in the region began to rethink their relationships with employees and service providers. The blind trust that was once common gave way to greater caution. If Nolson had imagined, suspected, or Rita had witnessed any act that suggested Antonio Carlos had any sexual desire or might respect his daughters, a family friend observed, "I'm sure they would have thrown him out of the house. They wouldn't have allowed it." But the reality is that there were no obvious signs. Antonio Carlos maintained a facade of respectability for 15 years. He never displayed inappropriate behavior, never gave cause for suspicion. It was this ability to conceal his true intentions that made the crime all the more shocking. The case also raised questions about the law's application in Brazil. Many felt that, regardless of the sentence imposed, nothing could bring the two young women back or heal the family's pain. Even if everything is done in terms of justice, the law, and enforcement of sentences, it won't do any good. Nothing will do any good for a mother who wakes up and can't sleep, who wanders around the house, who no longer has a sense of her own life. The story of Renata and Roberta became a landmark in Brazilian criminal history. Two promising young women with dreams and life projects had their lives cut short in the cruelest way possible by someone who was supposed to protect them. Renata never realized her dream of becoming a judge. Roberta never entered university. Their plans, hopes, and the entire future they had in store were brutally cut short by a few minutes of extreme violence. The family that was once a model of unity and harmony became a symbol of an incurable pain. Nolson and Rita, once proud parents of their accomplished daughters, became grieving parents, forever carrying the weight of an immeasurable loss.
The case of the Mogi das Cruzes sisters remains one of the most shocking in Brazilian criminal history. not only for the brutality of the crimes, but mainly for the breach of trust it represented. It's a cruel reminder that sometimes danger is much closer than we imagine, and that absolute trust can be fatal. Today, more than a decade after the crimes, the family's pain remains undimmed. Vlita continues to wait for the day she can be reunited with her daughters. Nilsson tries to move on, but he forever bears the scars of a trust that cost him the most precious thing in life. And Antonio Carlos? He remains imprisoned, serving his sentence away from the spotlight, while the family he destroyed tries, day after day, to find a way to live with a pain that will never be healed. As Chief Francisco said, a child who loses a father and mother is an orphan. A father and mother who lose a child is tearing their own soul apart. And that's exactly what happened to Nelson and Rita. Their souls were torn apart forever on that November 11th, 2011, when they discovered that the man they trusted most had become the author of the worst nightmare a parent can live.
Our channel is struggling to monetize its videos due to its true crime content. So if you enjoy our work and want to help us continue producing, please consider donating. It's quick, secure, and makes all the difference. Just click the button with the heart symbol that says "Thanks a lot" right below the video, or follow the link in the description. Any amount helps us keep the channel active and continue bringing you these stories. Thank you so much for your support.